Have you ever felt something shift in a conversation with a woman, a quiet electricity, a sense that something more than small talk was happening, but you couldn't quite name it or confirm it? What you're about to discover are three of the most subtle signals that reveal when a woman has already begun to feel desire. The third one is particularly easy to miss, and most men walk right past it without ever realizing what just happened. Here's something worth understanding before anything else. If you've spent time replaying conversations in your head afterward, wondering whether she was interested or just being polite, if you've had that experience of walking away from a moment only to realize hours later that something significant may have passed right through your hands, none of that points to a flaw in you. It simply means the language of female attraction was never explained to you. And it is a language, quiet, layered, and very different from the way most men experience and express interest. For many men, attraction tends to be immediate and forward-moving. You notice someone, something pulls at you, and the impulse is to move toward it. But for many women, attraction tends to unfold gradually, more like a series of doors opening one at a time than a single sudden rush. Women frequently read the emotional environment before allowing desire to develop further. They observe. They create small moments. They look for emotional safety and genuine curiosity before letting attraction move in any meaningful direction. And when they do begin to feel it, they rarely announce it. They signal it. Those signals live in body language, in the quality of eye contact, in the way a woman positions herself in a room or in a conversation. They are easy to overlook, but once you know what they look like, they become impossible to unsee. Think back for a moment. Is there a memory somewhere in your past where a woman seemed to always find a reason to speak with you? Where someone at a gathering stayed near you longer than the situation required? Where a woman laughed at the things you said with a warmth that felt different from everyone else's? At the time, you probably assumed she was simply being friendly. But later, you may have wondered. That experience is far more common than most men realize, and it has nothing to do with intelligence or social awareness. It has everything to do with never having been taught what to look for. So let's slow everything down and examine three of the clearest quiet signals that desire has already begun. The first signal is touch, but not the kind that happens by accident or out of social obligation. This is touch that appears without an obvious reason. It isn't a polite tap on the shoulder or the kind of contact that happens in passing. It's something more deliberate, even when the woman herself isn't fully conscious that she's doing it. In the study of interpersonal attraction, this kind of contact is understood as the body's way of closing physical distance when the brain has already registered interest. Attraction activates something in us that seeks proximity, and touch becomes the most natural bridge between two people. Picture the scene. Two people are deep in easy conversation, both laughing, both relaxed. At some point during her response, she reaches out and rests her hand lightly on your arm. She doesn't pull it away immediately. There's a beat, maybe two, where it stays just a moment longer than the situation technically called for. That pause is significant. It reflects comfort, and comfort is almost always one of the first signs that something more is developing. When someone feels uneasy around another person, their body keeps its distance. Movements stay guarded, personal space is maintained carefully. But when warmth and curiosity begin to grow, the body relaxes its invisible boundaries. Touch starts to appear, sometimes in the smallest ways. She might playfully fix something on your clothing. She might reach for your arm while making a point in conversation. She might steer you slightly while moving through a crowd together. Individually, each gesture seems unremarkable, but repeated across a single conversation, they form a pattern worth paying attention to. There's a story that captures this well. A man was at a friend's birthday gathering talking with a woman he had just met. The conversation moved easily between music and travel and laughter. At one point, she reached across and brushed something off his sleeve, something he couldn't even see. He assumed it was just a polite instinct. Then she touched his arm again while laughing, and again a few minutes later while making a point. Each moment lasted barely a second. He thought nothing of it. Months afterward, the two reconnected through mutual friends and eventually talked about that first night. What she told him stopped him in his tracks. She said she had been touching his arm to see if he felt the connection too. He had missed every single signal. This happens constantly because most men have been conditioned to wait for bold, unmistakable signs, but genuine attraction rarely announces itself loudly. Research into interpersonal attraction shows that people who feel romantic interest tend to mirror physical closeness, leaning slightly in, orienting their body toward the other person, and initiating small moments of contact. These aren't calculated choices. They emerge naturally when the brain releases certain chemicals associated with bonding. Oxytocin, sometimes called the bonding hormone, drives feelings of trust and connection, and physical touch both triggers and reflects its presence. So when a woman's hand lingers on your arm a half-second longer than expected, her body is simply expressing what has already begun internally. One touch in isolation doesn't confirm anything, but a pattern of small, unnecessary contact throughout a conversation often tells a clear story. If this has ever resonated with something from your own experience, sit with that awareness for a moment. Recognizing it is the first step to understanding it. Now, the second signal, and this one lives somewhere most people think they understand but rarely truly observe. It lives in her eyes. You've heard that the eyes are the window to the soul. That phrase may sound like poetry, but psychology gives it a great deal of weight. Human beings transmit extraordinary amounts of emotional information through eye contact. Interest, curiosity, discomfort, trust, attraction, all of it moves through the eyes long before any words are spoken. And when a woman begins to feel desire, something in the way she looks at you quietly shifts. It's not that she stares more. That's not how it tends to look in reality. What actually appears is more like a rhythm. She looks at you. She holds the gaze for just a moment longer than social convention requires. Then she glances away, usually downward. And then, a few seconds later, she looks back. That cycle, gaze, soften, look away, return, is one of the gentlest and most consistent indicators of growing attraction. What makes it particularly fascinating is that most of it falls outside conscious control. When a person feels genuine interest in someone, the body responds in ways that can't easily be managed. One of those responses involves the pupils, which naturally expand when we look at something we find appealing. It's an involuntary reaction from the nervous system, the brain recognizing something it wants, and the body opening slightly in response. The point isn't to study anyone's pupils. The real signal is the feeling carried by the gaze itself. When a woman feels drawn to you, her eyes soften. The quality of attention changes. It becomes warmer, more lingering, less like the polite eye contact people exchange in everyday life, and more like genuine presence. Think about a moment where you were in conversation with a woman, maybe sharing a story or talking about something that mattered to you, and you noticed that she was watching you with a kind of focused gentleness. She smiled slightly, then her gaze dropped for a moment. Then it came back to yours. If that felt different from ordinary conversation, it was different. That's the quiet language of attraction expressing itself through attention. Nonverbal communication researchers have examined these patterns for decades. There's something sometimes called the triangle gaze, where attention moves between the eyes and the mouth and back. But in romantic attraction, something additional appears in the quality of that attention, a warmth, a sense that the other person isn't just processing your words, but feeling the moment alongside you. And closely connected to this is the way attraction changes listening. When a woman feels drawn to someone, she tends to listen with unusual focus. She remembers small things you mention. She reacts emotionally to things you describe. Her attention sharpens in a way that goes far beyond polite engagement. That attentive gaze means something. It means you have her attention in a way that few others do. Here's a simple example. A man was at a casual dinner with several friends. The table was full, the room was lively, and conversation bounced between everyone. But every time he spoke, he noticed something consistent. A woman seated across from him turned slightly toward him. Whenever their eyes met, she smiled warmly and then looked briefly downward before meeting his gaze again. He described it afterward by saying that even though the room was full of people, the space between them felt strangely private, almost as if the noise had gone a little quieter around them. That feeling, that sense of the world narrowing slightly between two people, is what focused attention creates. And it begins with the eyes. The next time you're in a social setting, try shifting some of your attention away from what you're saying and toward how people are responding to you. Notice who holds eye contact a little longer. Notice who looks back across the room more than once. People are communicating through these signals constantly, and once you begin reading them, the entire social landscape starts to look different. Now the third signal. And this is the most revealing of all, because while touch and eye contact can occasionally appear in casual or even professional contexts, this third signal is almost always intentional on some level. It involves something most men never think to look for: a shift in space. When a woman begins to feel genuine attraction, she often starts doing something very specific. She creates a pocket of privacy where none existed before. Consider the way most social situations are structured. At a party, conversation happens in groups. At a restaurant, people speak across a shared table. In a workplace, discussions typically include several people at once. Social environments are naturally communal. But when attraction begins to stir in a woman, something interesting can happen. She may start looking for subtle ways to step outside that communal space, just slightly, not dramatically, not in a way that calls attention, but just enough to create a moment that belongs to the two of you alone. This is the signal that slips past most men entirely. She creates privacy where there wasn't any. This doesn't mean pulling someone into a separate room or making any kind of dramatic move. In practice, it's almost always far more understated than that. You're standing in a group and she turns towards you and says, "Come here for a second. I want to show you something." Maybe she points out something across the room. Maybe she suggests grabbing a drink together. Maybe she simply lowers her voice slightly so that what she's saying reaches only you. These small moves might seem like nothing, but psychologically they carry considerable meaning. When someone feels attraction, they often begin constructing what researchers call microenvironments, small and temporary spaces, where deeper interaction can happen without the pressure of an audience. These moments give connection room to develop more naturally and more honestly. For many women especially, emotional comfort is deeply tied to attraction. Creating that small private space gives her an opportunity to observe you more closely, to see how you respond when the interaction becomes more personal. Do you stay present? Do you hold eye contact? Do you meet the moment with warmth and steadiness, or do you grow nervous and begin forcing things? These moments function almost like a quiet invitation. Not a test in any competitive sense, but a gentle opening, a way of saying, "Let's see what happens if we move just slightly closer." A man once described attending an engagement party with around 30 guests. Throughout the evening, he had light, easy conversations with a woman he'd just met. Nothing significant, just the usual laughter and casual talk that fills a room like that. Then at one point, she leaned toward him and said, "Hey, come look at this photo album my friend just set out over here." The album itself was unremarkable. Vacation pictures, nothing more. But something changed the moment they stepped away from the group and stood together by that table. The conversation became more relaxed, more personal. They stayed there far longer than either of them had planned. Afterward, he understood what had actually happened. The album was never the point. She had simply constructed a reason for a private moment between them. And moments like that happen constantly in social life. Sometimes it's a suggestion to step outside for some air. Sometimes it's asking your opinion on something away from the crowd. Sometimes it's nothing more than a slight lean and a lowered voice. Each of these choices quietly reduces the distance between two people, and when attraction is present, that distance tends to keep shrinking. Here is what most people miss entirely. When a woman creates that small private space, what she's watching for is not perfection in your response. She's watching to see whether you recognize the moment at all. Do you lean into it? Do you become more present? Do you stay calm and at ease? Or do you begin overthinking and rushing things forward? Attraction deepens most naturally when both people feel comfortable in the moment, not when one person is performing. The single most attractive quality available in those moments is calm, attentive presence. The ability to simply enjoy what's happening without trying to steer it somewhere. And that's precisely why awareness matters so much. When you recognize these signals, touch, eye contact, the creation of private space, you stop feeling confused by what's happening around you. You simply respond. You stay engaged. You let the interaction move at its own natural pace. and something remarkable tends to happen in that space between two people who are paying attention. Take a moment to reflect on whether you've ever experienced this third signal. Maybe someone once invited you to step aside for a quieter conversation. Maybe someone lowered their voice and shared something with you that felt like it was only for you. Maybe someone suggested coffee or a walk somewhere even when other people were around. If any of that sounds familiar, there's a strong chance you were witnessing this signal in real time. And now you have a name for it. Before wrapping up, there's one more layer worth sitting with. Understanding these signals is not about reading people like puzzles to be solved. It's about developing the kind of awareness that makes human connection far less mysterious and far more natural. You don't have to guess. You don't have to force anything into existence. You observe, you respond, and you stay present. Once you understand all three signals, something genuinely interesting happens. You begin noticing opportunities that used to pass you by. Human attraction almost never begins with fireworks. Most of the time, it starts with something much quieter, a small gesture, a lingering look, a moment where two people feel slightly more aware of each other than they do of anyone else in the room. These moments are easy to miss when you're distracted, nervous, or focused entirely on what to say next. But when you begin watching more carefully, a completely different picture comes into view. You start to notice that attraction is happening around you all the time, in the way someone leans slightly closer while listening, in the way a laugh lingers a beat too long, in the way someone glances at you across a room and then quickly looks away the moment you catch them. These are the whispers of human connection, and once you begin hearing them, everything changes. Confidence in relationships almost never comes from having the right words prepared. It comes from understanding what's already happening. When you're no longer guessing, you stop feeling anxious. You simply respond to what's already present between two people. The shift from confusion to clarity is one of the most quietly powerful things that can happen to someone navigating human connection, and recognizing the signals is only part of it. The real depth is in how you respond. When a woman lightly touches your arm, you don't need to analyze it. You just stay in the moment. When she holds your gaze and smiles, you don't need a prepared line. You simply meet her eyes, smile back, and keep the conversation moving naturally. When she creates a pocket of private space, you don't rush it. You enjoy it. Simplicity almost always works better than strategy. People are at their most attractive when they are genuinely relaxed, attentive, and present, not when they are performing a version of themselves. Think about the conversations in your life that have felt the most alive and effortless. They probably didn't feel engineered. They flowed. Both people felt free to simply be themselves. That ease, that absence of pressure, is one of the most powerful forces in attraction. Attraction is not something you manufacture. It's something you recognize and tend to when it appears. And that's exactly what awareness gives you. When you begin noticing these quiet signals, you stop trying to build something from nothing. You simply see when interest is already there. You're no longer trying to impress. You're connecting. And genuine connection, when it's met with presence and calm, tends to grow on its own. A man once said he had spent years believing he was simply bad at reading women. He assumed that kind of understanding was something other men were naturally born with. Then one evening, while waiting in a coffee shop, he struck up a conversation with a woman seated nearby. Nothing dramatic, just easy back-and-forth conversation. But for the first time, he noticed things he'd always looked past. She touched his arm lightly while laughing. She held eye contact and smiled in that soft, returning way. And then after a few minutes, she said, "Do you want to move over there?" It's a bit quieter. In that single conversation, she had offered all three signals. And for the first time in his life, he saw them. Rather than overthinking it, he simply stayed present. He let the moment be what it was. They ended up talking for nearly an hour. Afterward, he said something that stayed with me. He said that for the first time, he wasn't trying to make something happen. He was just noticing what was already happening. That is what this kind of awareness actually does. It trades confusion for clarity, and clarity brings a calm that most people find far more attractive than any rehearsed approach ever could. So here's a small challenge to carry with you. The next time you find yourself in any social setting, a gathering, a coffee shop, a work environment, try observing a little more than usual. Notice who turns toward you when you speak. Notice whose eye contact holds just a little longer than expected. Notice who finds reasons to keep the conversation going. You may be surprised by how much is being communicated without a single word being spoken. If any of this resonated with something in your own life, share it with someone who might need to hear it. And the next time you notice a touch that lingers, a gaze that returns, or a quiet moment created just for the two of you, pause. Pay attention, because those whispers may be telling you something important. And now you know how to hear them.